Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Metamorphic Site Productions podcast. I am your host, Hannah, and today we have a guest host, a guest speaker, our first guest ever. He is actually my pastor, one of my pastors, which is great, but he is very, very qualified for the movie we're talking about today. He's Grant Forrester. He's a chapter director of Ration Christi at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. He's an apologist, a Christian apologist, and focuses mostly on college prep. So that's what Ration Christi does. They're a ministry that focuses on apologetics, Christian apologetics in the university setting. But also he's the co-host of his own podcast called New Heart Theology. I will go ahead and kick it to him, and he can talk a little bit about that, introduce himself more. But yes, Grant Forrester, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing really, really well. I'm excited to be here. Longtime fans of Hannah and Will and all that they do for their ministry and all that they do for the body. Like she said, I'm an apologist. That's been my training. That's been my upbringing for the last 7 or 8 years. The Lord's been very gracious and equipping me and preparing me and then giving me the work to do with my hands. Like she mentioned, I do have a podcast. It's called New Heart Theology. Me and another gentleman named Kevin Lehman, who is also one of the pastors here at our church. He's a biblical counselor, and he had a vision to want to produce material and resources to help believers fight their sin. And then God was gracious enough to let me come alongside of him and produce this material. Please look it up. Follow us if you've not heard of us, New Heart Theology. But yeah,
I've been listening to it. I haven't caught up yet, but I've been listening to it while I've been doing other things around the house, and I would just definitely give it a listen. And I think you can just look it up on like Apple Podcasts. I think I find it on Spotify too. You find ours on Spotify.
Yeah, it's on most of the stuff. I mean, Audible, yep. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Mm-hmm.
It's perfect. Yeah. Okay, so the reason why I have Grant on, and we kind of went over it when we introduced him, we are going to go over the God's Not Dead series.
Oh, yeah.
And the first movie is kind of perfectly set up for what Grant deals with every single day because it takes place on a college campus, a public university, and it's about a young man who takes Philosophy 101, I believe. Mm-hmm. His professor tasks him and says, hey, you have to say God's dead to pass my class.
Yeah, he makes him sign a paper. It's crazy.
Yeah, and he's like, well, I don't believe that. And he's like, well, then you have to defend your faith, which is literally Christian apologetics. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a perfect movie to talk to you about. He goes through a couple of arguments in the film for the existence of God. Yeah, which we can talk about and break down, since that's something I've sat through a couple of your talks about the exact topics they talk about in the film.
Oh, big time.
And you talk about a lot with students about how to talk to professors who are like the Kevin Sorbo character. Yeah. So we have the classic questions that I went ahead and wrote beforehand, and we just go ahead and that'll guide us through our little conversation here. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into God's Not Dead. Okay, so the first question, what are 3 things that you want to point out first? So this question is like whatever you want to talk about. Like this is when you first finish the movie, you're like, I really want to talk about this. It doesn't really fit into anywhere else. I'm just going to mark it down. And my very first thing, it could be funny, it can be serious, but my very first thing I wrote down was that they made Professor Radisson's, which is Kevin Sorbo's, the relationship really icky. It's really weird. Did you notice
his relationship with his lady?
Yeah.
It's gross.
She was his student. I was in shock.
Yeah.
I was in shock when I was like, actually paused it and I was like, this is distracting from the whole movie.
Yeah, I know. He even says something like, you made me compromise my morals, like tempting me in class. It's just is weird, man.
Yeah. And
they're just trying to make Professor Radisson like as icky and gross as possible. And
I said, is it to cast him more as a control freak? Or an egomaniac maybe, but I was like, this is just taking away. This is more dramatic than what we're supposed to be focused on in the movie. And I remember actually just pausing it and just being like, I have to process this for a second because it sounds really bad. It sounds like unethical. I don't know if that is because they says that he waited, I guess, until after she passed, but still it sounds unethical for them to be together. So that was the first thing. I was like, I did not expect that to be in this movie. That was a really weird way for them to add that to the story. So just to make it clear, basically he taught his girlfriend she was his student. And then after she passed his class, then he like made his move, which is,
icky.
Icky. Number 2, every romantic relationship displayed had one person who was off the walls, unreasonable, and a jerk.
Yes. That's in here somewhere. Oh gosh, that was like one of the things I mentioned. I was like, why? Like, no one gets a relationship right. Like, there's not a single one that's like, oh, here's a great example of a dating relationship.
It's kind of like Dean Cain's character.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Dean Cain's character. He's in. I understand his girlfriend, who's the main character in that subplot. She gets cancer.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, you got cancer? Well, sorry. He just leaves. Yeah. He is like the most despicable person, because he's like, oh, your cancer doesn't fit into the schedule of my life. Yeah. So he leaves her. But like, his character is so almost cartoonishly bad in that way.
Yeah.
And then I also didn't understand why they gave Josh a girlfriend. I think Josh was the name of the main character.
Yeah.
I was like, she doesn't really serve a purpose, only to just be like upset with him.
Yeah, it's like, how can we maximize persecution for Josh's life?
And yeah, she's very like, she doesn't support him.
No.
She claims to be a Christian, but as soon as he's like, I'm gonna stand up for what I believe in, she's like, yeah, but
my life goals.
Yeah, we're supposed to like be married by next summer, and like I was like, they're sounding like they should have gone to like Liberty University or something, and not a public university.
They should have sought out a biblical counselor like Kevin Lehman.
No, but yeah, so I think his name's Josh. The main kid, the guy that he wants to be a lawyer, and so he starts doing all the basic, to get his bachelor's degree and all those things. He goes to his college. He goes to his college specifically to be with his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Or I think it might be the other way around. I think his girlfriend is like, I'm going to go here.
I think they both planned, but it kind of seems like it was her idea. Like, she keeps saying things like, we have a plan. And he's like, I think you mean you have a plan.
Right.
Kind of like he's just being drug along in all of it.
Right. And as soon as this happens, she freaks out. And she's like, you gotta just submit to this guy so our plan can all work out. Everything's great. Like, does this really happen? Yes. It kind of felt once again out of place in the story. It felt like they just put her in there just so every time we had a break from like him going at it with Kevin Sorbo, now he has to like go at it with her.
Yeah, it's irritating.
And then like they had the girl who was Muslim. She was, yeah. It didn't feel, I guess that's what they were implying, but it almost felt like they didn't get that completely. They didn't, what's the word I'm looking for, portray it completely correct. It seemed like it wasn't quite accurate to like with her hijab and everything. I was like, I felt a little.
She was kind of Americanized Muslim.
Westernized, yeah. But like her dad kicking her out and everything.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's very black and white, cutthroat. Like the relationships in this movie are very easily broken.
It's like max good or like max bad. There doesn't seem to be any like reality to it or kind of any gray area.
Yeah. I think my third one was exactly, I just went into it. It says, why did Josh have a girlfriend? Oh, I said he could have just had a friend he talked to about the class, and then she felt unnecessary. Yeah, they could have just made her like a friend that he would go and talk to and kind of confide in to give us those breaks and kind of see from his point of view. But instead, they made it like really contentious. Okay, so those are my first three things I wanted to point out first about the movie. I'll go kick it to you.
Yeah. So I've got the first things first. If you're ever sitting in a class, let's say that you're a student or you were a student or you're planning on being a student, if a professor gives you a sheet of paper and says, write down something that contradicts your worldview and then sign it, they can't do that. A professor can't force you to give up your constitutional rights, especially of like the freedom of religion. That's just not going to happen. If a professor ever tries to do that, you take that sheet of paper and then you take it to the academic dean and you say, hi, Professor so-and-so just tried to make the entire class sign this. Like that's not reality. And so I've experienced professors try to silence a particular party of belief, whatever party that is, but no professor's ever, especially in writing, no professor's going to put that in writing for them to. They
don't want a paper trail.
Yeah, so it's just an aspect of the movie. But there are professors who will try to silence a worldview in their class, and so that's why I do what I do. The second thing that I wrote down was that a professor would immediately be brought before the academic dean if they threatened or forced a student into a project, especially when he says, okay, since you're not going to sign it, you have to stand in front of the class, and whatever you produce is going to be 30% of your final grade. Oh, by the way, I'm Kevin Sorbo. I'm not going to be convinced at all.
Right.
And so that's not realistic. A professor certainly might, and this I've seen too, they might blackmail you by threatening your academic, like your success in their class. They may I've had professors that will grade poorly on of you that they don't like, but then you just, again, you take the paper with evidence now, like you go and you make your case to the academic dean that your professor is being unjust. But there's a moment where Kevin Sorbo comes out of the class, or Professor Radisson comes out of the class, and he corners Josh and he says, I see that your focus is in pre-law. He's like, we don't do any pre-law, right? And he's like, if you keep this up, he's like, I'm going to make sure that no school or no law office ever hires. That's just no way, man. And people are passing by in the hallway like nothing's wrong. Here's a professor blackmailing a student their future career. So it's a lot of that's just kind of high drama. That's kind of the two words that I could take away. Just high drama.
Yeah, and then also I was like, pre-law is definitely a thing people do.
Yeah, they needed another line, this university doesn't do pre-law. It kind of sounds like he's saying pre-law doesn't exist, but that's totally a thing.
Yeah, because people have to get a bachelor's before they go to law school, I believe.
Exactly.
And they usually take certain classes to get up to, they have a better chance of going to law school. That confused me. I was like, the pre-law is definitely something people do in college.
Yeah. And then the third thing, and this one's kind of more of a theological kind of thread throughout the whole movie, and I see this a lot in high school and college, just in churches that we might speak at. Is there's this general theology that if you don't step up to the plate, then God's going to kind of be disappointed in you. That's just not biblically true. God is sovereign over the entire universe, and He's even sovereign over the angriest and most malicious enemies of Christianity and His kingdom. And so this would mean that there is no pressure to perform. It's not like God's kind of got it. And there's this moment where Josh says something like, I just really feel like God wants me to defend Him.
Yeah.
I'm like, God doesn't need you to defend Him. Now, if you defend God, it will be for your benefit. You will experience growth in there. So to imply that by choosing to drop a class where you are getting bullied will somehow cause God to reject you is not biblical at all. And they even use that verse. What's the verse that David White, the pastor, gives him? It's something like, if you reject me in front of men, then I will reject you.
Yeah.
Almost as if you're not going to get into heaven if you don't stand up to this bully. There's nothing that you could ever do that would make God disappointed in you, right? And the Newsboys lead singer, in the Michael Tate, says, I can't imagine the smile you put on God's face. Now, the moment that you got saved, you put a smile on God's face. And so as much as that line is encouraging to hear, the danger of these kinds of statements and this kind of theology is it's to imply that if Josh hadn't have done what he did, then God would have been disappointed or God would have rejected him, and that's just not true.
I think the point of defending our faith, because we all are always supposed to be able to give an answer because God is sovereign, even if we feel like we've failed completely at it, the point is that God can use that to help other people. I think they do that pretty well in the movie, actually.
I do
with,
like that, yeah.
The Chinese student.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, his dad's also very extreme. And we kind of talked about there's some racist depictions of that, about the culture being so extreme. But he just kind of is in the background and he just sees this all happening. And then he's like, oh, I believe this. And I think that's a good, I think they didn't intend for that to be as good as it is. But I was like, that's very true to life, where if someone just kind of sees God working and then they realize the truth. Did you wanted to add anything before we moved on?
No, that was good. And the little, I don't know if I have that mark in here about I can't remember his buddy's name. I should have written it down. But that was spot, even if Dr. Radisson, spoiler alert, he gets hit by a car at the end. But even if Professor Radisson had continued to live and hated God's guts, and that Chinese student came to faith, that's a successful apologetics encounter. Even if Josh fails the class, gets kicked out of school, and maximum persecution, which is kind of what the movie's trying to portray. Even if all of that had happened and that Chinese student still came to faith, that was a successful apologetics encounter for sure.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been a much more intense, powerful movie if all that happened. If everything failed except this one person. Came to faith, and it's that was worth it. God cares more about the eternity of his heavenly kingdom and his children than the momentary gain of like school or pre-law or winning an argument. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next question. So we're gonna talk about filmmaking techniques. This is very layman's terms. You can just say, I liked how they did this one shot. I like the lighting, or maybe even like the costumes or something like that. So this is what we did not like. So my number one for this was everything is very convenient, but not completely so. I felt that they could have more neatly tied up ends. So I felt like everyone kind of like conveniently knows everyone else, and things kind of, and like maybe they're trying to be like, well, God's orchestrating it all.
Yeah.
And then I said that some of the they could have neatly tied up ends. I might have forgotten a little bit about what I'm talking about here, but I kind of felt like by the end, things were still kind of like wiggling around. I felt like Dean Cain's story could have been cut.
Oh, yeah.
I think it could have been changed where she didn't have to be involved with him. Everyone really loves that scene with the mom with dementia.
Yeah.
And she tells him like, oh, you know, she has that speech about that moment of clarity. But I don't know. I just felt like that was too much. So like, so there's a woman who is a journalist. She's dating this Dean Cain character. She gets cancer. She ends up getting saved. But then Dean Cain has a mother who has dementia and a sister who is Professor Radisson's girlfriend.
Yeah.
And so it's like this weird chain of events that's connected together. I kind of get what they're doing, but at the same time, it just felt too much. It felt like
lazy writing.
A little lazy. They put too many people in there. They could have streamlined it. They could have still had the mother who had dementia. I don't know. There's just different ways they could have worked that to where it's like, this is not like I said, everything felt too convenient, but kind of sloppy at the same time.
Right.
And then I said, okay, number two, or get rid of some of the fat of like, that's what we call it. Like, you know, trim the fat off. Aisha, I think Aisha is the Muslim girl.
She is, yeah.
You could, like I said, you could have taken her story out, or Dean Cain's story. I think I liked Aisha's story, but it did seem a little too not fleshed out enough,
right,
for something that was as serious as.
Yeah, it went from like 2 to like 13, like it got really serious really fast. I really enjoyed her in the movie. I would have liked to see her like get more screen time and kind of her story, or none of it, like just Josh or more of Aisha.
Yeah, and but the thing her story is very serious because it's just not just Islamic people. It's anyone who comes from a family who is not a Christian, like highly religious that's not Christian. If you become a Christian, very often you lose a lot of your family, or you lose ties or connection with them. And that's for any religion that, you know, sometimes it's even like, you know, Judaism or Hindu or anything, like they have, if your family is very religious in another religion and you come to Christ, and that's what Christ says, like I'll break families apart, like I'll have, you know, mother against daughter and all these things. It's a very real aspect of the Christian life. It is definitely something that a lot of Christians face. Kind of felt it was so lightly handled and just kind of put in the background. I was like, I feel like this is just too heavy of a subject that's too real for too many believers. Have it back there. And
it got really heavy, and then it was like her whole life was worked out by the concert. Like she's standing behind Josh and like singing, and I'm like, wait, weren't you just like your whole life destroyed like through the 3 scenes ago?
Yes, yeah, and then. Yeah, and they kind of implied that she's going to be with Josh now at the end. Is that what?
Oh, I didn't get that.
I thought maybe.
Maybe. Gosh, this movie can't nail relationships at all. She doesn't need to be dating anybody after what she's been through. Yeah. I think it was almost just like, again, like this kind of like unspoken kind of invisible hand. She just happens to find herself behind Josh at the concert, and she knows who he is because she heard the conversation with him and his wretched girlfriend in the cafeteria and all of this stuff. And then she's like I know you. I don't.
Yeah, I guess
I hope it's not romance. I hope not.
Because she knew that he broke up with his girlfriend, or because it was connected with him and his like broken relationship. I thought they were trying to like imply that they were going to be like a thing. But yeah, like I'm just saying, the reality of her story for a lot of people who come to Christ, they give up their lives, their families. They sometimes never see their family again. Yeah. Their family doesn't want to talk to them. They lose support. She loses support. I just feel like, man, I feel like that is a story that needs its own movie.
And I think out of all of that's a good idea. Like that would be an incredible standalone, like a spinoff. But it was so close to being like the scene where her dad finds out that she's been listening to Franklin Graham. I think it was Franklin, not Billy. But there's that dramatic scene where he throws her out, and then he has to like force her out of the way away to close the door, and then goes, it's gonna make me cry talking about it, and then goes inside and starts weeping. I was like, that's perfect. That was so well done. I just hate that it didn't get more. Because out of all of the side stories, that was by far, I think, one of the best ones.
Like I said, a very real
reality.
It's
incredibly real.
Yeah, I think I pretty much said everything. I have a little extra here. It says, I felt killing Radisson was too much, which he just said. The professor, the main villain of the story.
Yeah.
He gets really dramatically hit by a car.
Oh, yeah.
Where he like flies up in the air.
Oh, yeah. And the car like keeps going. It's like a hit and run.
It's like a hit and run.
Jeez.
They don't have time for all that. They don't have time for the guy to come out and be like, oh no, and he like calls the police. He's like, I'm so sorry. He's like, we gotta get a deathbed confession. But David R. White happened to be there. Just happened to be there when he gets hit, and he accepts Jesus right before he dies.
Yep.
I don't know how you felt about that, but I was like, I don't know if this is the right way to end this character.
Right.
So, yeah.
He did have some sass. So like I guess I can save it to a little bit. I'm a Kevin Sorbo fan, but Dr. Radisson had some sass. He was like, the pastor says, I believe that this is an example of God's mercy, and his response is, I'm dying. You call this mercy? And I was like, that is real world right there. That's the atheist for you. Oh, it was good. And then it's like in the 30 seconds before he gets, and I know I'm kind of going backwards. In the 30 seconds before he gets hit, he's got that moment at his desk where like he finds the letter from his mom, who's not referenced the entire movie. And then the letter is something about his mom being a strong believer and like wanting to encourage him to be a believer. And I was like, see, that should have been like way earlier. Oh no, see, I've already misspoken. He says that's the reason that he wasn't a Christian, because his mom had cancer.
Yeah.
And she believed in him. And I think his words were, he believed in her while he strangled her to death. Strong language.
Yeah. And this idea that like, oh well, God gave her cancer and killed her, but if you understand what we believe is that Christ gives us eternal life. So everyone will die in this life in some way, shape, or form, but then they will go on and to be with Christ in eternity. So I could kind of understand. I don't think he says, oh, I needed her and he took her away. I think he says something about how she believed she'd get better, but she ended up dying.
Right.
And so I'm like, I could kind of understand if from his person, like if I was writing this, if he was like, I was just a boy and my mother wasn't there. I could understand that more than like, oh, she had faith and he didn't deliver, because what she believes is like, if she were to die, she would get better.
She was delivered. Yeah.
She was delivered.
Yeah.
So I was like, it's almost, it's kind of like the people who, they're probably Christians writing it. It almost feels like they're having a hard time putting themselves in the shoes of someone who is going through that.
Right.
Who's not a believer.
Right.
Like how they would think about it. But I feel like it would have been more powerful if they just kept him alive and he came in like later movies and he maybe did get saved and he started defending the faith. Oh
man, a philosophy professor converted. That's powerful stuff.
Yeah, it might have been maybe Kevin Sorbo got too expensive. I don't know. Maybe they were just like they couldn't afford him again. They were like, oh, we're just gonna
hit you with a car,
get you out of here. But so, what were the things you liked about the filmmaking techniques?
Oh man, so the things I didn't like or that I like?
Oh, you didn't like.
Okay, yeah. Like. So I think again, like you hit on a minute ago, some of the decisions to attempt sort of this multi-ethnic message makes the movie seem stereotypical, which is a bummer because Christians get labeled as racists in America like all the time. So the last thing we need is this Christian movie being really racially stereotypical. It's just tough. Like the Chinese dad is like business only, do whatever the professor says. The Muslim dad is like, I'm going to throw you out on the street for being a Christian. The Christian relationship breaks down. It's just there's a lot of and the African missionary guy, right, whose character has a ton of potential, but he almost is left with just these pithy sayings. This is a dude who does ministry in Africa, so like warring tribes, starvation, disease, and his character, without having any real like wisdom, is just kind of boiled down to pithy sayings. And I was like, dude, there's so much that he could bring to the table. Like he could have been the one talking to Kevin Sorbo. Like, you don't even understand suffering living in America. Like, let me tell you what I see every day in Africa and what people are delivered from every day in Africa. But instead, he's just the guy that says, what is the saying? God is good.
All the time and all the time.
And all the time God's good. And I'm like, dude, there's so much more. But yeah, so I thought the kind of the multi-ethnic stuff kind of boiled down to being stereotypical. His girlfriend drove me and my wife, Lexi, insane. And then a lot of the scenes just felt like sermon bumpers. Like there's kind of these Christianese like moments, like when and like I like the way you put it, like cartoonish, like Dean Cain's character is like super cartoonish. Like when they're at dinner and she's like, I have cancer, and he's basically like, well, you chose that. And you're like, what? What?
He's like, you chose to do this at this time.
He's like, I thought we had agreed on our plans. I'm like, dude, she didn't choose cancer. What the heck? And then he just kind of like, he leaves. I'm like, dude, that's like a sermon bumper. Like that's so outlandish and wild and just like, and he orders like an expensive bottle of wine and leaves her to pay for it. I'm like, this is literally the worst man in the universe. Oh my gosh.
Right after she's like, I have to pay for chemo. He's like, well.
Oh, it was terrible. And so like some of those scenes are just like, they're just like on the nose. And then like this again, sort of a theological, maybe even like a pastoral one. The overall grandeur of God is just kind of lost through the feeble theology, and I'm going to say easy believism, and that might not need some explaining. But the idea that like you just come to God and all your problems go away. Like you just kind of come to God, and then all of a sudden you feel better on the inside, and that's not always true. Like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, by the way, who was German pastor who was executed for preaching the gospel and trying to stop Hitler from doing what he was doing. He failed in the attempt, was arrested and then executed. And that is the guy that's calling American faith cheap grace.
Yeah.
And so Dietrich Bonhoeffer died for believing what he believed. He didn't kind of like beat the professor and then finish the class. Yeah. Like maybe if what you're saying, get a freshly converted Muslim girlfriend.
Possibly.
And so God is just seemingly so minimal in the movie because of how easy it all looks. Like how easy it all appears.
What we've said a couple times, the side characters have higher stakes in their stories than Josh does.
Oh yeah.
And it's weird.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, that's true.
Like, and the girl that was the reporter, I mean, she could possibly die from cancer and is now trying to find Jesus because she's faced with her own mortality. And then this other guy is in America, away from his home, away from his country.
Yeah.
And his parents are like, we will disown you for your faith. He has somewhat of a language barrier and a culture barrier now. And then this other girl is completely cut off from her family. She's like a teenager.
Yeah.
Not really an adult. And it's like everyone else around Josh has like real problems.
It's like complete devastation.
And Josh is just like, I'm the hero of the story. And like all he could, I mean, I don't know. The more I think about it, I'm like, it's kind of a little.
It's tough.
It's a little.
Yeah, it's tough.
Is there anything else about the filmmaking techniques you didn't like?
No. Something that I liked, something that I like really liked, or I really didn't like. So this kind of in both categories for like things I did like and things I didn't like was the soundtrack. A lot of the times the soundtrack was awesome and it was like perfect, and the way that they did it was great. And then there were some times where it was just like, again, cartoonish. And you're like, no, this just isn't. It doesn't feel. It almost. It kind of sucks you out of the movie for just like a second. It kind of what is it?
Suspension of disbelief.
Exactly. Yeah. And it just kind of ruins that for you, and you're like, yeah, I don't buy that. The soundtrack was hit or miss. It was really good when it was good, and then it was really distracting when it wasn't really good.
So the next question is, what did you like about the filmmaking techniques used? And so what I said I thought the cinematography was nice. It wasn't distracting. Sometimes you get films that are it's kind of independent film. I know that Pure Flix produced it. I don't know if they worked with another production company or not. But sometimes you get cinematography that's distracting. We watched this one movie called 90 Minutes in Heaven that has Hayden Christensen in it, actually.
Oh, okay.
It was really crazy. But the whole film was filmed very gray and like wet and like depressingly so. And so this one was like, okay, like everything looks pretty good. It doesn't look like it's been like a student film. They have they know kind of what they're doing, which is good.
Yeah.
Like I said, it doesn't take you out of the story. I thought the pacing was pretty good. The editing was pretty tight. It would have been better with the plot also being that way. So like the story and like what they chose to put in and what they chose to take out would have helped the pacing even more. But the pacing, I mean, and it's weird because once again, that movie we were talking about, 90 Minutes in Heaven, was also had a lot of pacing problems. It was very slow. And so I'm glad that this was not that way. It kept my attention. It didn't get boring. So that was good. And then the acting also wasn't that bad. bad. Sometimes with films like this, you unfortunately don't get great actors.
Right.
But I felt like, so the main guy, he was on Disney Channel, I believe.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Kevin Sorbo, of course, was Hercules and is
what a guy.
What a guy. I'm trying. Dean Cain's also a person who's been in multiple stuff.
The Duck Dynasty family.
Yes, they make an appearance. So far it wasn't bad. I've seen films that, you know, they have a really good heart and they're very earnest, but they unfortunately
the quality.
The quantity.
The quality.
The quality.
Saying like you feel the heart really well, but
yeah, but the sometimes the acting or just like the technical aspect of the film will just distract you, like if they have poor sound quality or not. So all that was good, and I think that is a positive in this movie's favor. Like I said, it was easy to watch. It wasn't boring, and it wasn't distracting in that way. The music, like you said, was distracting sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, what were the things you liked about the?
Again, the soundtrack again. Minus, and like one of the scenes that I mentioned when I said it, I thought the soundtrack was distracting, was Aisha's disowning, because again, like the scene is so potent, and the song that they have in the background, it just seemed, maybe it's because it just feels like such early 2000 Christianity, like early 2000s, like the kind of ballad soundtracks and things like that. But I did like the soundtrack most of the time, like 80% of the time. I thought the soundtrack was really, really good. And then every single scene with Kevin Sorbo, he's just great. You like love to hate him, and even when he's being icky, you're like, maybe that's the right. But even like watching Kevin Sorbo be icky, you're just like, he just does icky well. Like even when he's being gross about his student, and it's just, you like love to hate him. And then when they have the dinner party, him and the other, like the philosophy staff, and he's like clearly being verbally and emotionally abusive to this apparently student that wooed him. Even there, you're like, it's just it's entertaining to watch, and I know that sounds funny, but you're kind of pulled into the story. He just does a good job, and he's just mean, and you're almost like, he got hit by a car, and part of you is like, yeah, because I love to hate him, and then part of you's like, dang, I think he was moments away from accepting. Oh, never mind, he accepted faith.
Don't worry about that. It's interesting when you said about the dinner scene. So I remember reading when I was in film school about how actors can be good actors,
right?
And one of the big things is that they act really well with the other actor. So they're good at responding and reacting, or they're good at making. So when an actor goes into a scene, their goal is to make the scene come alive. So in that scene, his job and his character was to have the audience feel for her.
Right.
So he is really serving this, like, I'm a despicable person at that moment in ways that makes the audience care about the character they didn't care about.
Right.
So that's something that I don't know if he was probably, like, actors who are really good at their craft, who have been around the block a couple times, they try to find what is the purpose of the scene in the story, and then they try to bring that out. So that might be why in that scene you were like, because he's trying to direct, like, our attention as the audience, like, we need to care more about her. The whole time I was watching that scene, I was like, why are you with him?
I know.
Why are you there?
I'm like, hit him in the face with that tea tray.
I was like, you just need to leave. I felt for her. I was like, because obviously, I mean, she's like one of the characters we know nothing about, really. She's just there. But
and she's sweet in like every scene. Like in the beginning, Hannah mentioned that she was that Dean Cain guy, the successful businessman, the guy who left his girlfriend with cancer. She's his sister. And she, like, I think it's one of the first scenes you see her, she's like caring for the mom, you know, and like she has dementia. She's sweet in every scene, even when she's being abused, she's sweet. And then Kevin Sorbo, who, like Hannah's saying, which Hannah has the education in the film stuff, and I'm just a noob, but he does a really good job, and you definitely do feel for her, and you're like the whole time like, just leave, and then she does. And
it's because she's a Christian before this, and so you're like, that's so weird that you like. So it makes me feel even more icky thinking about it, because I'm like, because it feels like this is real life. This is real life. She's someone who maybe is desperate to feel like loved or to be seen. I don't know what her life is like. Her mother has dementia, obviously. Her brother is like a jerk. I don't know where he gets that from. So why does she go to Professor Radisson if she's a Christian? She knows he's a staunch atheist, and that's his thing. He loves, like, you know, being like, God's dead. He's also was her professor, which was like, for her, that was like a authority figure figure. So I'm like, her psychology, the more you think about it, it starts to be like, did she have a really bad relationship with her father?
Yeah, was she like abused or something?
Did he like leave the family?
Yeah.
Was she abandoned? She doesn't seem to come across as someone who feels like God's love for her.
Right.
Maybe that's like what she needs to learn, is that like, you know, God loves her. She doesn't have to. But like she's so in the background. She's so small. She's only really there to move the story along. Right. But in that scene with Kevin Sorbo, we're like, why is she here? Why is she staying with this guy?
And the only reason that Sorbo gets hit by the car is because she breaks him. Like she breaks up with him in front of the faculty, and he's like, I've got to get her back. So like maybe the only reason she's in the story at all is to get Kevin Sorbo to be walking down the sidewalk to get hit by a car.
And she's partying up at the concert. That's where she goes.
Oh yeah.
Partying up the concert. That might be the only reason, like, just to get him in that street. But it's even sad. I know she's just a character, but I'm like, if you really start, because when you're an actor, you have to think about your motivation.
Right.
So that actress is probably going through the script and like, why am I doing the things I'm doing in this scene?
Yeah.
And it gets real like dark. You're like,
yeah,
because when characters do things, and people too, when they do things that don't make any sense, that like feel like they just go completely against what you think would be just commonsensical, like not even like right, but like this is hurting you, or this is not good for you, like, or I wouldn't do this. This is just kind of like idiotic in this way. It means that there is like something inside that person that is like not right. So like it would be like a psychology type of thing, or that would be like they are reacting to trauma, or they are making these decisions because they think, like going back to kind of like New Heart theology, I guess. If they're not saved, they have like an idol that they are trying to serve, and they're doing it for this thing that they believe will fulfill them for whatever reason. So that's like when you see a character like that you're like, why are you just making these decisions that make no sense? And then if you just judge them as like dumb, I'm like, those are the characters you can really look into and really find like really connections to your life, because we do dumb things all the time. All the time, and it's because of our pain, or it's because of our trauma. That's the things that when you're a Christian, that's the thing that the Holy Spirit always does. Like always having you like tear up whatever you're tied up inside here. And so you have all, like I said, once again, the side characters of all these things that are like could make their own story. And it's just like crazy that even that character was not given that much thought. I'm thinking, man, like just asking the question, why is she with this guy? Why is she staying? And
it's like a common thread, like the poor Christian relationships, like her relationship, Josh's relationship. They're just not good examples. And I think one of the redeeming, well, I'm kind of getting into question 4, but one of the redeeming things is that conversation that the pastor, David White's character, has with her just before she breaks up with him. That's basically what he's saying is like your worth and your value come from God, and not from this Dr. Radisson. And that's kind of what she needed to hear that, so she could then go and then break up with Professor Radisson. I don't know if he's ever called Dr. Radisson, but that was actually really good. Like as far as all the dating stuff in the movie, that was probably the best contact point for Christian dating, was the advice that he gave her.
Yeah. And it's a question, because when you're a Christian, why would you date a non-Christian? Also a very common thing that we deal with, something that I dealt with personally. And whenever I had to answer the question of like, why would I be with someone who doesn't love my God as much as I do? Right. It was some real deep stuff that I was like, oh, this is like a lot of pain and a lot of trauma, and it's a lot of sin in my life. And so that's like once again, it's just I wanted to talk about that. The more I thought about it, I was like, they started a lot of these little side stories that hit different areas of like the Christian life. I'll let that rest because we need to move on. But thank you for reminding me of the pastor telling her that. I'm glad that she had that moment. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead. Did you want to say anything else about the filmmaking techniques that you liked before we go? Because the last 2 questions are gonna be the biggest ones we talk about.
No, I'm good on those. I'm good on the film.
Okay, so this is kind of the meat of everything, and this is why we have you on, because this is like, we're basically going to talk about the arguments that they make, the actual apologetic arguments they make in the film for the defending God's existence. So the question is, what did they get wrong in the message of the film? The first question. I'll go through mine real quickly. I said the point of the philosophy class is to present different worldviews. So this is like of any philosophy class. They did kind of address this, but the whole point of a philosophy class is to learn like how to think about the world, and like for the professor, the philosophy professor, to be like, oh, your worldview is just wrong. I feel like that is philosophy.
Anti-critical thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was like, that seems like that would not, I don't know. I've never taken a philosophy class like that. I know I've heard horror stories, but that part, I was like, I don't feel like that's right. The whole point of the philosophy class is to talk about all these different worldviews, critical thinking, and how we think about life and situations and all that.
Yeah. A real philosopher, Professor Radisson, he actually would have been more dangerous if he had said, our first unit, the deconstruction of Christianity, and he spent 6 weeks deconstructing Christianity. That would be way worse for any Christian in the room than being like, just sign this sheet of paper.
Right.
So like, that's actually what Christians face. Most professors aren't going to say, we're just not going to talk about Christianity because it's wrong. They're going to say, oh yeah, we're going to talk about it. We're going to spend about 6 weeks on it. And then afterwards, I'm hoping you're not going to be a Christian anymore. Like that's really what professors do. Now, the professor believes they're helping the student because the professor actually holds to be true that Christianity is a mind virus. That's language from Sam Harris. That they believe that it is a delusion. That's Richard Dawkins, right? They believe that they're actually helping the student, that they are intellectually liberating this young mind. And so they don't want to just punt on the opportunity to speak of Christianity. They relish in the opportunity to speak of Christianity and attempt to deconstruct.
Yeah. So that's kind of the worldly side of it, is like, I felt like they didn't get the actual philosophy class part correct. Right. I have this circled. They did not define apologetic. They didn't say this is what apologetics is, and I felt like that was important. They never say the word that this is a Christian apologetic.
That had to be like a creative decision just to not use the word.
Why do you think so?
Because sometimes the word apologetics for the uninitiated, they'd be like, like apologize? I'm not apologizing for the faith. You're like, well, no, that's not what the word means. Just for the record, apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give a defense. So when you give an apologetic for something, you're giving a defense for that thing. And so that might have been why they didn't use the word, because sometimes it just confuses people when they hear it.
Yeah, they didn't talk about it or even try to say, well, I'm defending the faith because of this reason. And number 2, I said, I wish they gave more resources for the apologetic arguments he talks about. And so I wrote down on number 3 arguments that I said he uses the Kalam cosmological argument.
Yep.
They talk about the problem of evil.
Yep.
They don't even touch on the resurrection.
Not at all. The movie uses in order. Like, this is the classical kind of movement. He uses the cosmological argument, which is at the very beginning, talking about like the Big Bang and the creator, and then he uses the argument from design in the second scene, and then he does the kind of the crescendo for the class when he finally sort of proves the professor wrong and all of the students agree with him magically. He uses the argument for morality, or the problem of evil, and so that's usually the order that you read it in, even if you're reading apologetics books. A great one would be I Don't Have the Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek and Norman Geisler.
The only thing I wanted to add was that, and maybe you're about to say this, that those arguments only get you to that there is a God.
Right.
Not the Christian God.
Exactly.
And so they don't talk about Jesus or the resurrection at all.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, we're not really talking about Christian God, the one we believe in. We're just saying that a primary mover or a higher power exists logically. Right.
And so Aisha's dad, the Muslim, could have sat in the philosophy room and said, yeah, I agree. And there would have been nothing wrong with that, because that's all Josh really demonstrated, was that God existed. He didn't make everybody Christians, which is the interesting part from an apologetic standpoint, is that Chinese student, praise God, that Chinese student comes out and says, I've decided to accept Jesus, which is interesting because Josh never mentions him once.
Yeah.
All he mentions is arguments for God's existence.
Right.
He doesn't mention like the truth of Christianity, and that's a whole separate wing of apologetics, is the reliability of scripture, archaeology and history, the defense of the resurrection, all of that stuff, and none of that is ever mentioned.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys haven't watched the second movie yet. In the second one, they get into the historicity. Is that
historicity
of Jesus Christ?
Oh, that's good stuff.
So maybe they're doing it movie by movie.
That would be clever. I mean, it's a great way to buy yourself like a series of movies.
Yeah. So that might be why. So in the second one, they have to basically be like, oh, Jesus was a historical figure, and saying that this is what he said in the Bible is, you can say that's just fact and it's not belief. And I'm like, yes. When you watch it, you'll see what we mean. That's going to be Will's one. But it was kind of infuriating because like it was another one of the situations where it's like, I don't know if this is like a thing, like the whole thing with like, oh, you have to sign this piece of paper, and it's just like, that seems so not realistic. It seems like no one can actually do that or like make that as an argument. In the second movie, it feels like there's no way someone could be taken to court over this, but they are. So it's like in this movie, it's like there's no way that anyone would actually take this professor seriously when he would do this. It was like, there's no way this professor is just outright going to do this and also think that it's like smart to do that.
Yeah, and like in lots of times, like I would have professors ask me, and true story, I would have professors ask me a pointed question, and then I would have students who are not Christian, they raise their hand and they would go, I don't know if that question's fair.
Yeah.
Right. And so like even students in Josh's like 101 class would have been like, whoa. Like regardless of what their worldview is, they'd be like, dude, you can't do that. Like you can't just like shush an entire, you can't do that. You can't censor a room. Well, we're getting more and more to the whole death of free speech culture, but my experience and still today, if professors are just like over the top aggressive in class, you will have students who aren't even Christian be like, hey, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's what he was saying, or I don't think you can do that, or so yeah.
People will surprise you. It's weird because there's some people who are like really passionate about like the Constitution and like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and they're not Christian.
Right.
But they'll defend your right to be Christian.
That's right.
It's interesting. Okay, so that's what I have for the what they get wrong in the message of the films, is that I wish they just went into more resources or like where he got his information, or maybe named the arguments he's talking about. And then also just talked about Jesus and the resurrection a little bit. Maybe it would have been too much, but yeah. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and let you. What do you think that they could have improved with the message of the film or the arguments that they talked about in the movie?
Yeah. So one of the things that they so each of the arguments that he uses, and just for the record, I actually was a fan of the argument, like the sections where there's kind of the argumentation. So that the first kind of lecture Josh gives, talking about the beginning of the universe and the evidence for those kinds of things is really good. Dr. Radisson's retort is really good, where he quotes not Richard Dawkins, where he quotes Stephen Hawking, and he says that because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. I hear that all the time, and just like any college student, that floors Josh. He has no idea what to do. That is true to the point. And then Josh goes home and he researches like a good Christian would do, and then finds out that Stephen Hawking's response is nonsense, and then comes back and has a really good second lecture. Both of those two side by side were really, really good. So the first interaction and the second interaction, really good. The second interaction, we even get an honorable mention for the great Dr. John Lennox, mathematician and philosopher of science extraordinaire. He is a great resource for any of you out there who are in fields of science or you're more scientifically minded. John Lennox is a fantastic resource. And then we get to the third argument, which is to be the problem of evil or the argument for morality. There's kind of a mixture between the two, which could have been done better. Maybe they just pick one or the other. But again, unless they had professional apologists on staff, I don't know exactly how equipped the writers are either. There's kind of this mixture of the argument for morality or the problem of evil, in which they put Dr. Radisson kind of in a debate format between him and Josh, which again could have been incredible, but there's this mixture, this kind of watery version that you don't really know exactly the argumentation that's happening, and then Josh like eventually like is physically approaching Dr. Radisson like in his pulpit. Professors have pulpits, I guess. Is approaching him in his pulpit. He's like climbing the stairs. He's being really aggressive. That was just again kind of not reality. It was just strange. The material they were saying, good stuff. Josh's retorts in that scene, good stuff until the last like minute and a half.
He made it very personal. That's when he started
exactly.
To, like, it reminded me a lot of that scene from A Few Good Men where he's like, "You can't handle the truth."
That's exactly yeah.
It's very much that where they try to do that type of scene, but that takes away from his argument. When
exactly.
He attacks him personally.
Exactly.
Because now you have taken his mind away from trying to just wrestle with truth and is like going back into his emotions and his subjective experience, and you can easily lose someone that way.
Yeah, and it also kind of made Josh look heartless for a second there. Like he's like working on the professor, and he's had this conversation one-on-one with Dr. Radisson about the loss of his mom, and so he's pushing on Dr. Radisson. He's like, tell me why you hate him. Tell me why you hate him. He's like, and then Dr. Radisson explodes. And he's like, I hate God because here's the
the reason. And then
he's like,
Josh is like, how do you hate someone that doesn't exist?
I know.
And I'm like, Josh, as much as that's logically clever, you just like stomped on another human being's emotions just to like make a point. And that's like not okay.
That's
like,
also not like Jesus.
That's exactly right. That's not like Jesus. And so it's almost kind of like this crescendo. And you're like, yeah, Josh, the apologist. Folks, that's not an apologist. That was a bully. So Josh, as even though Josh kind of won the argument, he lost the person in that moment. And that is not okay. Winning an argument and losing a person is not the way of Jesus Christ. And so we want you to win arguments, but we want you to win people by winning arguments. Yeah. And so it was just weird to kind of see lovable Josh, right? Wise and impressionable Josh, like he's growing and he's to kind of become almost like a Dr. Radisson in that last scene.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh man, that's not bummer. And as an apologist, I was like, yeah, these arguments are great. These scenes are great. Like movie aside, all the side plots, all the music, all the filming, all the casting. If you go watch the scenes where Josh, they're like 5-minute spiels, if that, of the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, there's actually a lot you can learn from that stuff. The material was good. My apologetics, at least novice, stamp of approval for the God's Not Dead movie. But then that third one, it was muddy.
It was a really bad example.
Yeah.
The second one, watch out, because there's more people that show up. They actually are there. They get called on the witness stand.
Oh man.
Some Lee Strobel shows up.
Lee Strobel.
Who wrote Cold Case for Christianity?
J. Warner Wallace.
I believe he's in there too.
He's got white hair.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's
those
there.
Guys are great.
They're in the movie talking,
but they're not actors. They're great though. Anything. So Lee Strobel, Case for Christ, great book and movie. I guess I haven't seen the movie yet. And then J. Warner Wallace's Cold Case Christianity. Both of those are great Christian resources.
I also want to say that they name drop Habermas they do in the second one. Yeah. So there's I recognize a lot more names.
See, there you go. Lots of resources in the second one. Then Dr. Gary Habermas is kind of the head or the leading expert for like research on the defense of the resurrection these days. So if you have questions about that, just Google Gary Habermas. Habermas.
What's his famous like minimal evidence?
The minimal facts argument is like the argument that he kind of fashioned. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he's famous for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember we were watching the second one, so you'll be in. I'm assuming you're going to watch it with Lexi.
Oh yeah.
So Lexi, Grant's wife, will be the guest speaker for next podcast.
Yeah.
But that one has a lot more people we know about in it, literally in the movie. So that'll be fun. Okay, and then the last one. Are you good with your things they got wrong?
Yeah, I've mentioned some of the other stuff. I guess one more plug here. This again, and we were kind of harping on this a minute ago. The lesson on like Christian faith. So this is one of the biggest hurdles that I have to address as an apologist. I have to re-educate Christians on what the word faith means. And this movie gets it wrong the whole time. And this movie I guess this really should be a bigger point than it is in my notes here. Faith is not something that's blind. Faith is not something that you just kind of. It's not like Christian wishing. Like I wish that this is true. I want it to be true. I wish that faith is really, the Greek word is pistis, and it really should be translated as trust. And trust is something that is built on something. It has a foundation. There are reasons that you trust someone. There are people that I would let babysit my kids because there are people that I would let babysit my kids because I have reasons to trust them, and then there are people that I would never do that because either I have reasons to not trust them or I just don't know them. But trust is a better word, and there's this overarching kind of like just have faith, just have faith, just have faith. Again, back to this kind of easy believism, like just say it and then all of your problems will kind of just go away. And this is kind of epitomized with the whole car scenario that keeps coming back which is really funny. The rental car delivery guy is like, he's also an actor. He's like struggling actor trying to do the death of a salesman. That whole comic relief bit is funny. But then at the end, he gets back in his original car, and again, this African missionary, so much potential. It's just like, you just have to have faith, whatever that means. And they pray about the car working, and then the car magically starts up. And you're like, okay, like sure, I guess providentially God could do things like that. But what that teaches the audience is that faith is blind and faith is just kind of wishing, or it's like a Christian superpower. There was no reason to believe the car was going to start up. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like blind. Like you just have to have faith. Like faith in what? You just have to have faith.
The faith part that comes with that, I guess, would be, and they do touch on this, but they don't do it as directly. You're supposed to be somewhere and your car doesn't start up, and it's just like, okay, I'm not going there. And then you say, God, what is it that you want me to do here?
There you go.
That
yeah.
I'm not going there because for whatever reason my car's not starting.
Yeah.
And maybe it's nothing. Maybe sometimes I think, well, maybe if I were to go right now, maybe I would get into something. I don't know how God works providentially.
Maybe if his car had started up at the beginning, he would have ran over Kevin Sorbo early, and then he would have become a Christian.
I mean, I don't know. That's probably not theologically sound because God's so sovereign. But I have to always think about like, okay, if my plan is not working out, what's the proverb? Men make plans, but God guides their steps.
Yeah, that's in Ecclesiastes. That's really, really good. And that's something that's like completely missed. And that's one of the things that I think minimizes kind of the majesty of God in the movie. Is it almost seems like God is more like he's kind of reduced to this Greek kind of understanding of fate instead of being a person that has organized all things. It just kind of all seems like this abstract fate kind of thing, and not really a like the God of the universe.
Yeah, but that's a good question. Like if you find yourself like your plan's not working out, you can just pray, God, what is it do you have something here right now that I need to be doing that would bring you glory, or something, or maybe something for you, maybe God would rather have you pray right now or be home, or something that's better for you in that situation. But that's I think that's the Christian way to look at when things happen like that, when instead of just being like I have to make my plan happen, you can start being like, okay, like God's in control. Am I supposed to be paying attention right now to something? And because they talk about that, because the reason why they can't go to Disney World, I think they're going to Disney World.
I don't even know where the university is supposed to be placed, like I don't even know what city they're supposed to be in or anything like that.
I feel like they're going to Disney World in Florida is where they're supposed to be going, and they never get there. But they end up, because they stay, they're there for Aisha when she needs them. So and Josh and Mina, and so
and Kevin Sorbo on the side of the road.
Right, and so that's the trusting God part. Is that he's not gonna. He does everything. If I say this wrong, go ahead and correct me. He does everything for a reason, and if you are like open and more sensitive to what he's doing, he can use you in many different ways instead of just always just blindly like I have to go make my stuff come to fruition. You can see, if you ask God to open your eyes to be like, how are you using me today, or what do you have for me to learn today?
Right. The idea that we trust God even in the midst of plans that look like they're failing. We trust him not because it's just like, well, it's just blind. No, you trust him because he's already proven himself throughout your life to be trustworthy. He's proven himself in scripture to be trustworthy. Every time he says he's going to do something, it actually happens. When he says he's going to do it, then it might as well already be accomplished because it's going to happen. And so this kind of boiled down understanding, again, it's just kind of blind faith. You're not supposed to have reasons for why you're a Christian. You're just supposed to kind of emotionally do it. When that student meets Josh in the stairwell, he meets him in the stairwell, and he's like, I've decided to follow Jesus. And Josh is like, that's great, bud. Come with me to this concert. And I'm like, wait. This is a huge moment. Josh, this is the moment. That's great, bud. Come with me to the conference or the concert.
There's this 90s movie. I don't know if you know what I'm about to say. There's this like, it's a meme now, but he's like, Jesus, man. And he smiles. You ever seen that? The blonde guy. And he's like, it's like they're in a high school and he's like this. He's like, Jesus, man. It's like a really old 90s Christian movie that's like very, I need to watch it. I think we watched a little bit of it. His name's Martin.
Will over here to the side saved us here. So I know that Mina is Dr. Radisson's girlfriend. Aisha is the student who's disowned. Josh is obviously Josh. His girlfriend really isn't important. Her name escapes me. I guess we should know David White's character, Reverend something.
Yeah.
No, his name is his real name in life. Oh my gosh. If he named himself in the movie, right on the nose.
Yeah.
I think it is Reverend Dave. I think you're right.
I was expecting his name to be Martin. Is that like his English name? Like,
I guess.
Because like I know when people who are foreign exchange students, when they're from like Japan or China, they'll pick an English name to go by.
Yeah.
It's much easier.
Yeah.
I know, like we have a lot of Japanese foreign exchange students at the college that we're from. I don't know if you noticed that, but there's a lot of people from Japan. I worked as a barista there. They'd always come up and they would be like, yeah, my name's Sally. I'd be like, perfect.
We had a buddy, Kunal, and we're getting in the weeds here, but he was Indian, and he's got a wonderful testimony of coming to Jesus Christ where he like literally threw out physical idols. And but he would go and he would just tell everybody his name was Kevin. Like, what's your name? He's like, Kevin. He's not going to try to explain Kunal.
But so Martin is the Chinese exchange student that we've been talking about, who has one of the better stories, we think. And he's in the second movie, I believe so. But he is the character that we feel he was the most refreshing. He had the zeal of like a new believer, and he was just like, I'm going to follow Jesus no matter what.
Yeah.
Okay, so
last point here.
Last point. Okay, so what did they get right in the message of the film? I said, I like the theme of the testifying, witnessing to God is the most important thing in this life.
Yeah.
They do that, like I said, with the side characters. With Martin, we just said that was a big one, where just Josh like talking about his faith and having just that act like brought one person.
Right.
That was the most powerful thing in this movie to me. And that was kind of a theme. So like Aisha, she ends up getting kicked out and she goes to the church, and then they're there for her to like help her. That was also really great that they were there to like support her when she needed it. It was a little hokey, I felt, with the journalist who gets saved with
by Michael Tate,
by
Michael
the
Newsboys
and the Newsboys. I was like, it's okay. It was a little hokey.
I know.
But I was like, okay. And then they showed the power of sharing your faith. Like I said, like these side characters are all affected by people who shared their faith, which is great. That's a really good theme.
Yeah.
The defending of the faith. It's weird because I think the movie thinks it's about like defending your faith and like telling the world God's not dead. But like, I guess, you know, maybe God snuck in there a little bit like, hey, also this is like the important thing is to witness to people God's love and truth, and not so much to like hit it in their face, but living in obedience, how the power that can have.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about like getting it right. Just doing it every day as your best of your ability, God will use it. And then the third thing, my last thing, I like showing the practice of trusting God in all your circumstances, which is kind of really the pastor and the African missionary was their thing mostly. But they encouraged other people with that too. Aisha was a big one. They talked to her about that because hers was the most like direct into that storyline. But they had that saying that God is good all the time, and all the time God is good.
Yeah.
But we talked a lot about those 3 points already. So I'll go ahead and ask you, what did you like about the message of the film?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing, like the whole shtick for the whole movie is defending the faith. So the chief message being like kind of centering around stepping up to the plate, defending the faith. 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give a defense for the hope that is within you with gentleness and respect. Very important. And so it's kind of the whole movie is kind of an homage to addressing the state of the American campus. And it is that they nailed that. This idea that there are professors out there who want to eat Christians' lunch. Yep, there are those. I can name some from UNCW. I was a history and philosophy student at UNCW, so I got plenty of experience with that. So there really is there's a real battle, like an actual one, on the American campus. As if you've seen the movie and you've watched all the way to the end, then you've seen when the credits come up, there's like university after university after university, lawsuit after lawsuit, just kind of all over the screen, dozens of them, and even UNCW is up there.
Really?
I
looked for us.
Mike Adams is up there. Yeah, it's Adams versus he's in there, and so we won't have to go into that, but UNCW is even up there as one of the things that was addressed in lawsuit. The Alliance Defending Freedom helped a professor, Mike Adams, defend himself against UNCW. So that's the main thrust of the movie is to learn. One, they don't really teach you how to do it, which I hate. I wish that there was more kind of, like you were mentioning, resources. Like I wish there was more of an equipping function of the movie. It's kind of just an encouragement to have the boldness and go out and defend the Christian faith, which you definitely can do. You definitely can do that. That's why I do what I do. I liked the argumentation and evidences that he used, primarily in the first two, like I mentioned. However, in reality, professors usually won't be as engaged in the argument for Christianity. Like it's really neat that Dr. Radisson allows Josh this opportunity that usually doesn't happen. Usually professor gives you like 10 seconds. Oh, you think that? Well, go ahead, tell us. And then you start telling them, and then maybe they're snickering or they're laughing, or maybe they're respectful and they're like, oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, here's why I don't think that works. But the professor has the microphone. And since the professor has the microphone, that person has the authority, that person has the power, they can outgun you. But here's the thing. Your classmates do not have a microphone. Your classmates are not the authority, and your classmates cannot outgun you. And so if you present an argument that has teeth, and that argument is able to to kind of dig into what the professor's getting at, other students will be affected by this, like Martin's character in the movie. And so that's the most important part. I've got 3 or 4 really major examples or kind of anecdotes from my time at UNCW where a professor either kind of insulted Christianity and maybe I jumped in and asked a question, or I engaged, or a professor asked me a question directly in class. That's my favorite one. Or it was a group project we were working on in an archaeology class. All of those examples, like if you can convert, the professor, by all means, God is good. But your real target is going to be your peers, because most likely the professor is not really going to change their mind at all. So engage. Don't be afraid to get engaged. That's kind of the whole purpose of the movie. Like, you can do it. You can go and you can argue with your professor. I wouldn't look for any deathbed conversions in the rain. Nothing like that.
On the street.
But yeah. It almost would have been more realistic if Kevin Sorbo, like the pastor, had said, "I believe this is an act of God's mercy," and Kevin Sorbo said, "I'm dying. How can this be mercy?" and then die. I'm like, that's just kind of that's a lot of the characteristics that I see from these professors, how dogmatic they are and how argumentative they can be, and especially ones as mean as Dr. Radisson. I wouldn't have expected him to do that, but God is better than I am, and I believe that we'll find that God is much more gracious than we ever thought that he was. What else I got here? Yep. You want to fight. You want to not be afraid to fight the professor. This will affect your peers. The generic Christian content in this movie, so like dating, general understandings of faith, I thought that was really weak, which is unfortunate. However, the argument scenes that Josh has are really good. Lexi said that it was almost like there were 2 teams of writers. Like there was a team of really astute writers writing all the apologetics material, and then a team of less astute writers writing the rest of the movie. And then it was like the less astute writers took over for the third argument scene. And I was like, but it was, again, I don't want to play the. In all, the movie is entertaining and the movie is sweet. And the 2 first apologetic scenes are really, really good. Let's see. This is one I like too. This is really important. If you don't take anything else, hear me say this. All real objections to God's existence are, at the end of the day, moral ones. They are heart issues. They are internal spiritual issues. And this is what Scripture tells us. Scripture tells us that the whole world knows that God exists, that he's made himself plain to them through the things that he's made, namely his invisible attributes like his power, right? The world suppresses these truths in unrighteousness. And so that's exactly what we see Dr. Radisson doing. He's angry and he's prideful, and he's suppressing the truth about God's existence. And that is what is brought out in the third scene as Josh is challenging him, as they're kind of doing that debate. No one truly objects to God purely from intellectual reasons. And yet that is the number one objection to the faith. People will say that they have intellectual problems, but you start digging and you start removing these intellectual problems. We had a student come for about a year to Ratio at UNCW each week. More objections. And eventually he came after about a year and he was like, "I literally don't have any more objections. You guys have answered all of my intellectual problems. I don't know what to do." And then we started talking to him about faith and trusting in God and understanding that all of us have doubts, all of us have questions, all of us wrestle with things. But there comes a point where you've got enough evidence and enough reasons and enough proof that God has given you about himself that you can lean on him, that you can trust. And so as much as the final scene in the classroom pains me to watch, the moral argument, it's pretty forced, considering my real life experiences as an apologist. So I don't want to shy away from that, how forced it kind of seems, but it proves the point that Paul makes in Romans that all have suppressed that truth. So they nailed that one for sure.
Very good. Like, that was a nice nail in the coffin. That was a good ending.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Oh, it's been my pleasure entirely.
So I'm so happy to have Grant Forrester. Hopefully next podcast we will have Lexi Forrester, his wife, who is another apologist, another RC director. No, she's not a director, is she?
I don't know what her title is. She's just Ration Christi extraordinaire. She's done a lot of stuff. She ran the international Instagram at one point. She's done the university. She's done high school. She teaches students. She's all kinds of stuff. She's just the best. Yeah,
and then also don't forget to check out Grant and Kevin Lehman's New Heart Theology podcast. You can find it on Spotify, anywhere, any platform that podcasts are on. If you really like what Grant has to say, he is on there way more than he's here, and he talks way more in depth about these types of things, and with the wonderful Kevin Lehman as well.
Oh yeah.
So thank you again, and we'll be signing off for the Metamorphic Site Productions podcast. Goodbye, everyone.